In today's gospel, Jesus asks, if salt loses its taste, with what can it be seasoned? What he means is that a lifeless, tasteless Christianity is a disaster to the world. For the world depends on Christianity and the Christian church in order to become what it's meant to be. I think that part of the struggle with Christianity is that we're often in contention between the person we are now and the person we ought to be. And that's often a very, very difficult journey to make. We look at Jesus' teachings and his church, and we look at the lives of the saints and we feel like, man, that's so hard. That's not for me. I just can't measure up. I can't do that. While yes, the struggle for virtue and moral uprightness, it's not easy, and it's a major weakness of ours, is that we fail to see who we really are. See, there are two "you are" statements in our gospel that can't be missed. Jesus is telling his disciples, and he's telling us, you are salt of the earth. You are light of the world. You see, the realization and acceptance of what Jesus is saying to us today, it can be earth-shattering, and it can be transformative to us. I mean, Jesus doesn't say, become like the salt of the earth. Why wouldn't he say that? Makes more sense. He doesn't say, do this and that so as to become the light of the world. No, he says, you are the salt of the earth and you are the light of the world. You see, each of us is already salt. We're already light by virtue of our baptism. Something has changed in us. Our responsibility is to uncover that light, is to bring the salt to the surface. That we have that worth, and we have so many opportunities, friends, to add flavor to a world that often seems so tasteless. To add light to a world that's often covered with so much darkness. So what can we do to allow salt to flow and the light to shine in us and in the world? St. Paul, in our second reading, he gives us the how. In our second reading today, St. Paul, he goes on to stress that the power of the good news of Jesus Christ is not dependent on rhetoric or literary devices or tricks, but it's dependent on reality. In his letter to the church in Corinth, he gives us insight as to why he often finds it difficult to transmit this message, to be salt and to be light in this world. Now, mind you, this is the same St. Paul who brought the faith to more people than anyone else, any other apostle. He helped shape the world to bring people to Christ. But here he tells us a very real story of what it means to be a Christian. You see, he admits that the message he brought them was the news of a Christ crucified, and that he brought it in weakness and fear. You see, Paul didn't draw people to the message of Christ by beating his chest and showing how strong he was and confident he was and certain he was. But instead, he shows us who he really is and who he is to them and who Christ is to them. Friends, here's the secret sauce of Christianity. To be Christian is to choose a God who became human, a God who chose to be vulnerable, a God who draws us to each other through our vulnerability, through a self-gift. Vulnerability is the how. And not only is vulnerability necessary in our relationship with God, it's necessary in our relationship with others. The neurological and biological aversion that we have to vulnerability, I mean, it's justified, right? Naturally, we avoid vulnerability almost at all costs. Why? Because vulnerability can hurt. It can wound us. But we fool ourselves in thinking that vulnerability is simply the quality or state of being in which we're exposed to physical or emotional harm. The paradox, friends, is that vulnerability is also the only way in which we really grow in true and lasting transformation can take place. It doesn't happen anyway, whether in our relationship with our spouse, with our neighbor, and with God. I mean, think about it this way. When was the last time you did something really meaningful in your life that was comfortable? That didn't force you to come out of yourself, that stretched you a little bit or a lot? Friends, we're called to find ourselves to be whole, to be as vulnerable as we are in this vulnerability, in this humanity, so we can find God. You see, to be a Christian is to choose a God who is also vulnerable. God is almighty, but he's also all vulnerable, because he chooses to be with us in our weaknesses. Therefore, our relationship with him, it needs to be a relationship of vulnerability, of giving, so that his life-giving light and his life-enhancing salt can, through us, be shared to the world.